white cells. I'm a little, just because a lot of people miss the ALL, and that's kind of scary because that's like the easiest one out there. So I think I need to go over just a little bit better. So the way to do that is to pop a couple case studies and test. And they won't have those hard questions if there's not hemoglobin issues. Pretty much, what do you think this is and why? What does hemoglobin do? Basically, it transports oxygen from the oxygen-rich environment of the lungs to the oxygen-poor environment of the periphery and within your cells. Hemoglobin has an affinity for oxygen or an attraction to oxygen. This is just simple chemistry. We have a ferrous iron molecule which bonds reversibly to oxygen. That reversibly is very important. If it goes to the lung and picks up oxygen and then walks around your body and goes, ha ha, I got it, and you don't, not going to help anybody, is it? It needs to be able to release that oxygen. It doesn't have a brain, it can't think, so it has to be some sort of biochemical mechanism that regulates the release of oxygen where it needs to be and picking up oxygen where it can get it. The things that affect oxygen affinity: pH, the availability of hydrogen ions, positively charged ions, the concentration of 2,3-BPG, and I will slip and call it 2,3-DPG, so it's the same thing, diphosphate, biphosphate, same thing. Temperature, the actual structure of the globin itself. Remember, the globins are proteins, about 140 amino acids long. And just like Legos, sometimes you don't get it put together exactly right. Okay? So there may be slight variations in each chain. Even in perfectly normal chains, it's not uncommon to have a little bit of structural variety. The stability of the heme molecule. We talked about the protoporphyrin ring and the iron that is inside of it. Hemoglobin also transports a little bit of the CO2 back to the lungs, but a lot of the CO2 just dissolves in the blood and is taken out that way. Okay, we talked yesterday about structurally normal hemoglobins, right? Anybody remember which ones what's adult hemoglobin?
It's alpha and
It's 2 alphas, 2 betas. Okay, it's a tetramer, 2 alphas, 2 betas. That's our normal. I was just going for hemoglobin A, but hey, a step farther good, one there. So our hemoglobin A is our most normal structural form. Hemoglobin F and A2 are also normal structural forms. Here we are talking about functionally normal hemoglobins. Okay? So functionally hemoglobins. Oxyhemoglobin, quite frankly, it has 4 O2. That's 4. It has 8 oxygen atoms attached to the molecule. We call this the relaxed form. If you think about oxygen as a drug for hemoglobin, when it's got its drug, it's chilling. When it needs its drug, it gets jittery and it gets tense. I told you I've got a lot of stupid mnemonic devices. Deoxyhemoglobin, it doesn't have any oxygen. It's given up. This is the tense form. Carbaminohemoglobin is one which has CO2 attached to the dimer or the tetramer instead of oxygen. And that's just a carrying, it'll take it back to the lungs, and in the oxygen-rich environment, it will much more happily take the oxygen instead of the CO2. So it'll give up the CO2 and pick up oxygen instead. Pretty much, pH of blood, it's called the Bohr effect. As the pH lowers, okay, so lower pH, does that mean more oxygen or more hydrogen atoms available or less hydrogen atoms available?
more.
More hydrogen. So pH goes down. The affinity for oxygen goes down. So oxygen will be released into the tissues. hemoglobin function structure is influenced by other molecules. There's other molecules out there, 2,3-BPG being one of the biggest ones, which means that hemoglobin is allosteric. Will I ever ask that on a test? No. More CO2. CO2, or carbon dioxide, is a very weak acid. Okay. Where does the CO2 in your body come from? Be more specific. Breaking down of sugars. Okay. Glucose metabolism produces as one of its byproducts CO2. So as your cells are functioning, they're creating CO2, which is decreasing the pH of the surrounding tissue, which means that when the hemoglobin comes through, it's going to release its oxygen because the atmosphere or the area is more acid. So it will decrease the affinity for the oxygen. So in a more acid environment, it will release the oxygen. Well, everything except your lungs is a more acid environment because of the secretion of, or because of the production of CO2. Body temperature is going to be about the same as body temperature goes up, or as body temperature goes down, it's going to release more oxygen. 2,3-BPG concentration, when you break down glucose, another one of the side products that comes out of it, an intermediate in that step, is 2,3-DPG. This is a diphosphoglycerate, and it's found in red cells. What it does, okay, when oxygen binds to the hemoglobin molecule, it causes a structural change. Okay, you remember that those globins, there's like 4 pieces of globin, right? It's the tetramer. When oxygen binds, just because of the way chemistry works, it causes a structural change in the formation of, or the shape of the hemoglobin molecule. When it causes that change, it kind of opens a little pocket. And 2,3-DPG happens to slide nicely right into that pocket. As you bind more 2,3-DPG to the hemoglobin loses its affinity for oxygen. So increased 2,3-DPG is going to decrease oxygen affinity, which means you're going to give up that oxygen. These are the regulatory mechanisms that cause the hemoglobin, when it gets into the cellular environment, to give up that oxygen that it goes to the lungs and gets. Yes?
On the third dot, as it increases amounts, that's referring to the DPG?
Yes, as the 2,3-DPG concentration goes up, the affinity goes down. And I do recommend that you understand that pH goes down, affinity goes down, CO2 goes up, makes it more acid, so as CO2 goes up, the affinity goes down. And then 2,3-DPG, as the concentration of this chemical goes up, the affinity goes down. So know the up and downs, literally, of this stuff. Because the questions on the test, bless you, the questions on the test will probably say, as CO2 rises, the affinity, hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen will, and then there'll be your options. I guess this is kind of a repeat slide, isn't it? I kind of think I need to take that one out. These are functionally variant hemoglobins. Structurally, these are just normal hemoglobin. It could be hemoglobin F, most likely hemoglobin A. This has nothing to do with the protein chains or what type of hemoglobin it is. This strictly has to do with what has the iron picked up today. Iron is supposed to pick up oxygen. Sometimes it'll pick up a little CO2. It should not pick up certain other things. The first one is a methemoglobin. Methemoglobin means that it has been changed to the ferric state. What state is it supposed to be in?
Ferrous.
Ferrous, which has a valence of 2. The ferric state has a valence of 3. And in chemical bonds, 2 plus and 3 plus make a huge difference. Just simple chemistry. Ferric iron will not bind oxygen. We can reverse about 1 to 2% of that, so if you have a high net hemoglobin, certain things we can do will reverse, but once the hemoglobin becomes met hemoglobin, it pretty much is going to stay that way. It's not totally reversible. Has anybody ever heard met hemoglobin before, maybe attached to something else? Like maybe cyan met hemoglobin? What's cyan met hemoglobin? It's cyanide. Does that ring any bells for you guys on any of the tests maybe that we do? Like maybe the hemoglobin method that we do in lab? It's a cyan met hemoglobin. When we're measuring hemoglobin, what did I tell you about hemoglobin as far as stability? Is it stable? No, by its nature, it has to be unstable to be able to release and pick up and release and pick up. It has to structurally be able to wiggle around. You want to try and measure something that's not stable and wiggling around? No, it's very difficult to do. So how do we measure it? Well, we put it in a tube, we attach a cyanide molecule so it won't bind up any oxygen instead, and then we increase the state from ferrous to ferric, and that pretty much freezes the little sucker so that we then can measure it, and that's how the cyan met hemoglobin method works. Is we turn it into this more stable ferric state. So while this is more stable than regular hemoglobin, in hemoglobin that's not a good trait. Okay? We can't have it be real rigid. Carboxyhemoglobin is not a real big deal. It's just that it's carboxyhemoglobin is a big deal. This is carbon monoxide. Heme likes carbon monoxide 200 times better than it likes oxygen. That's like super drug. Once it has picked up that carbon monoxide, you can't really reverse it. About 10% of it can be reversed. And that's by putting them in pressure areas and flooding them with oxygen. So this is how carbon monoxide kills you. It binds to your oxygen carrying hemoglobin. So instead of your red cells carrying hemoglobin around and delivering it to all of your cells, it gets bound up with carbon monoxide and can no longer carry the oxygen. Yes.
People recover from carbon monoxide poisoning, though, is it because they're getting an epi?
No, it's because they get lots and lots of oxygen.
So they're,
And it depends on how much of their hemoglobin is converted. That's the big thing, yeah. How much of the hemoglobin was converted.
so it's not necessarily reversible, but it is recoverable.
It is reversible in that about 10% of the carboxyhemoglobin can be pushed back into regular hemoglobin, but we can also give you oxygen support and other things to help what hemoglobin that you have that's not carbon monoxide bound to function better until your body replaces.
That's not something that's going to spread though as the red blood cell dies. It's
No.
not going to continue.
The CO will be actually, the carbon monoxide will be broken down into carbon and oxygen, just through regular body metabolism. Sulfhemoglobin, and I don't exactly know, I guess for breathing in highly sulfurous fumes. Sulfhemoglobin is kind of the same thing here. You cannot, once you hook a sulfur atom onto the hemoglobin won't let it go for oxygen. So you may have 14 grams per deciliter of hemoglobin in your body, but if half of it's carbon monoxide coated or half of it has sulfur on it, you really only have about 7 grams of functional hemoglobin. Does that make sense? These functionally variant forms basically mean that you may have them, They will measure and read as hemoglobin, but they will not be able to help you with oxygen transport. This is a little tidbit that I tend to throw in here once in a while. Cyan hemoglobin, which is the method we just talked about we do in lab, does not measure sulfur hemoglobin. I think it's because the sulfur has more affinity than the cyanide, but I'm not 100% certain. Oh, and if you're thinking of poisoning somebody with the Drabkins, it'd take you like 3 gallons to make somebody slightly nauseous. Okay. I had somebody ask.
Red flag.
What's that?
It's probably a red flag.
Yeah, yeah, that's, yeah. Okay, yeah. Although, any of you have Siri on your phone? Ask it sometime how to hide a dead body.
Oh, I have.
It's hilarious. It comes back with again. It has all kinds of cute answers. Iron metabolism. When we talk about hemoglobin is made up of 2 basic portions, the heme and the globin. The heme is that protoporphyrin ring, and we've talked all about it. We're going to. Right? It's a organic compound, and we stick an iron in the middle of it. So we're not going to talk anymore about the ring, but we're going to talk a lot more about the iron. Because when you go to the doctor and they draw your blood and they say, doctor's going to measure your iron. Is he measuring your iron? Or is he measuring your hemoglobin? He's measuring your hemoglobin is usually what it is. But people understand the word iron. They don't understand the word hemoglobin. Iron is absolutely essential for life. It is one of the chemicals that is found on this planet that makes us be able to exist. It's about 70% of all of our body iron is hooked up in our hemoglobin. So of all the iron that you keep in your body, about 70% of it is already bound up in the hemoglobin that's circulating through your system. Myoglobin, which is basically a muscle hemoglobin, it's also a protein compound, it's a little bit different structure, but it kind of holds a little bit of oxygen in reserve. It's for that fight or flight thing where, you know, your muscles can't wait for your lungs to get you some more oxygen because the lion will get you. So it has just a little bit, there's just enough there to give you that last push, that last little spurt of energy. Storage iron. Iron is stored as hemosiderin, and these are actual granules of iron, and you find them in macrophages, most notably where? In the bone marrow. That's why bone marrow is conducive to erythropoiesis, because the macrophages with the hemosiderin, or the available iron, are within the bone marrow. It's also stored as a protein compound known as ferritin, and that's very important when we start talking about evaluating your iron state. And the storage iron is about 25% of your total body iron. Ferritin is inaccessible, very important, that it's a reserve form. And it can be converted back and forth very, very quickly. Hemosiderin is partially degraded ferritin within the macrophages. Dietary iron, heme, ferrous iron, and non-heme or ferric forms are both in the foods we eat. We can absorb some of it, but actually if you only absorb about 10% of it. The good news is you only need a couple of grams a day. It really, for normal function, as long as you don't have an increased need, and as long as you're not losing it, pretty much all you need is a milligram or 2 a day.
Even children.
Children would be included in that increased need because they're still making new stuff. Okay. And if you eat more than you need, you just poop it out. You just don't absorb it. Your body will absorb what it wants, and that's all it's going to take in. Yeah.
Are you saying losing it? You mean that something's binding to the oxygen?
No, I mean more like blood loss.
Okay.
That's
But if 25% of it's being stored in the bone marrow already.
We're gonna talk about that.
Your bone-
We're going to talk about it in the next PowerPoint till you're sick of it. Iron is ingested in the stomach. Most of it absorbs in the duodenum and the jejunum, where it is converted by the hydrochloric acid that's there into the ferrous form. It combines with transferrin. Ferrin, Fe means iron. So ferrin is an iron. Transferrin means we're going to transport the iron. Okay, don't make these words harder than they are. Transferrin. It's going to transport it to wherever it needs to go. Some of it's taken to the bone marrow for hemoglobin. Some of it is actually stored as ferritin. And most of the ferritin, and a lot of it's in the liver. It's kind of where our ferritin stores live. Every ml of blood has about a milligram of iron. That's just assuming you've got a normal hemoglobin value. That's about the equivalent. The total reserve of iron in your body is somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 milligrams. So you have about, 5 liters of blood before you run out of, you have enough reserve iron or enough total iron to make about 5 liters of blood, which is about what most people have. Iron is stored and reutilized. We don't lose very much. You absorb about 1 to 2 milligrams a day that is then cycled through your body. And if it comes in and you don't need it right away, it's going to be put into storage. If you need it right away, it's going to go straight to the bone marrow for use. We lose about a milligram a day, give or take a little bit, just through, basically we lose cells from our body all the time. So just from feces, urine, sweat, and just your epithelial cells falling off, we lose a little bit. That's why we have to replace about a milligram a day. We lose up to 2 milligrams of iron in a normal menstrual cycle, per day in a normal menstrual cycle. And nursing mothers also have an increased need because breast milk also provides iron to the baby. Again, we've already talked about how we store iron. We're going to get a little bit into chemistry, into clinical chemistry. Got it? Okay. We're going to get a little bit into clinical chemistry here. And clinical chemistry and chemistry are not the same thing at all.
Is it biochemistry?
Huh?
Is it biochemistry?
Not really even that. Serum iron, basically it's ferric iron bound to transferrin. UIBC is the serum unsaturated iron binding capacity. TIBC is the total iron binding capacity. Serum ferritin is our iron stores indicator, and we can actually stain it and look at it with Prussian blue. So what the heck does this stuff mean? I can measure how much iron you got floating around. I can measure how much iron I can absorb. The UIBC and TIBC tell me how much more can I have. Okay, they tell me how much protein do I have that will store iron for me. I can only put so much in there. And we're going to talk more about these when we talk about iron deficiency anemia, which we're going to do right now. Isn't that exciting? I know you're excited. And I will tell you, if we get through this one, which I think we will, no problem, we probably won't go through the whole thing today. I don't know, we might, we'll see. If we get through this one, we're not going to move on to the next one. It would be too much to put on a single test. We'll wait a minute. What did I say in my thought? Let me look. I don't remember what I said we would. Bone marrow. I said we would do bone marrow. Said if we get to it. Okay, so we'll do bone marrow failure tomorrow. It's actually not that hefty one. I'm trying to make it, okay, the hemoglobinopathies and the thalassemias, huge, massive amount of information. Your megaloblastic anemia is a fairly large amount. Your hemolytic anemia is massive amounts of information. So I'm trying to spread it out so that we don't wind up with two great big huge massive anemia categories on the same test. All right, etiology. What is etiology? What does the word mean? Anybody know? Etiology is how do I get it? Its source, its origin. Iron deficiency anemia is the most common anemia. In fact, what's the first thing the doctor tells you when you're anemic? Take iron. Okay? Usually, that's the most common. Give you some iron, you get all better, yay, life moves on. The way we get it, either through inadequate intake, and you only got to have a milligram or two a day, and you have a store of about 3,500 to 5,000, and I lose a milligram a day, so how long is it going to take me to get iron deficiency just because I'm not taking enough in? A long time. The one thing to remember about iron deficiency above all of the other anemias, if you get there slow enough, which this is a very, very insidious, very, very slow progressing disease, obviously depending on how bad it is. Increased need. All right, I've already mentioned a couple of groups who need more. Who needs more?
Kids?
Kids. Menstruating or lactating women. The elderly. With the elderly, it's more a matter of increased blood destruction or like slow GI bleeds and things like that are far more common in the elderly. Marching anemia. This is really silly, but frankly, when they're talking about marching, they were talking about the days when soldiers would go 20 miles a day wearing those little flat sandals. So I wear good running shoes because every time your foot hits the ground, some of the blood in the capillary underneath at the bottom of your foot bursts. Normally it's not very much, it's not significant, no big hairy deal. But if you're running a marathon all the time, or if you're marching for miles upon miles upon miles every day, every time your foot hits the ground, you have a little bit, it would be just like losing blood. Not much, just a teeny, teeny drop with each step. But over time, that does build up. And the best way to take care of this, wear good shoes. So that your foot isn't smacking the ground, but is being cushioned as it hits the ground. Parasitic infestations, especially malaria, are really bad on our iron reserves.
Pregnant women don't need more.
Say that again?
Pregnant women?
Pregnant women would be in increased need, yes. Progression of IDA, it comes in 3 stages, and you are going to need to know these 3 stages, and you're going to need to know all of the testing that is associated with these 3 stages. Because I'm going to give you the test results from an iron package, and you're going to tell me which stage we're in. Stage 1 is progressive. It's a loss of storage iron. So if I need iron, where am I going to prioritize? Where am I going to put that iron if I've got to have it? Where's my body going to put it?
In storage?
If I only have a limited amount of iron, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to store it away in a closet? What am I going to do with it? I'm going to use it. I'm going to put it in my hemoglobin. I'm going to make sure that I've got hemoglobin. That is my top priority. No hemoglobin, no oxygen equals dead. And death is always considered a negative outcome. So in this stage here, we're just losing our storage iron, which was just sitting in a closet anyway. We don't really need it. We're not doing anything with it. It's just kind of sitting there. So this stage is actually asymptomatic. You don't have any symptoms whatsoever. None. You don't even notice. Usually if we find iron deficiency at this stage, it's because either they have a history of it, or for some reason the doctor suspects that they're not eating right, or they have a nutritional defect, and it's usually found by accident if we find it in this stage. And again, these are not poof, stage 1, poof, stage 2. They move slowly through here. In stage 2, we've taken everything out of our storage and the cupboard is bare. All of our transport iron, the stuff that was floating around headed on its way to storage, we're starting to grab that and use that. And normally we shouldn't be using that. This is where we see these clinical symptoms start to appear. And the further down through this stage you go, the more clinical symptoms you'll see. We'll talk about those in a minute. Stage 3, this is functional iron depletion or true iron deficiency anemia. This is the stage where our hemoglobin starts to fall. Stages 1 and 2, the hemoglobin is still normal, unless there are concomitant problems. Keep in mind, you rarely have one thing. There's usually more than one thing going on. So, but in true iron deficiency, primary iron deficiency, nothing else going on, your hemoglobin doesn't start to drop until stage 3. The symptoms and lab values reflect that there is a full disease process going on.
Is it possible to have storage iron and still have your transport iron being used?
We'll talk about it here, okay? We switched to McKinsey, which is the book you guys are using now because it's easier to read than Rodak was. But Rodak had some of the best charts, so I snitched them. Basically, we have 3 sections in our body of iron. We have our iron storage, our iron transport, and our functional iron. Functional iron is going to be your hemoglobin and your myoglobin. That's the functional iron. Iron transport is going to be what we've got attached to transferrin. And iron storage is going to be our ferritin and our hemosiderin, most notably our ferritin. So in a normal human being, okay, nice normal iron status, we're eating what we're supposed to be eating, we're eating all of our red meat and all the stuff we're supposed to have, or non-meat source iron. Our hemoglobin's normal, our iron's normal, our TIBC and our ferritin's normal. TIBC means total iron binding capacity. So serum iron is how much do I have. TIBC is how much do I have room for. Okay. And ferritin is how much have I already put in the closet, how much have I already stored away. So when we hit stage 1, and believe me, you better know this chart, and it won't be in chart form, it'll be in word form. When we hit stage 1, what is the only test value that's abnormal? What's the only test value you see on there that is not normal? Ferritin. Do you know how often we measure ferritin in a healthy individual? Never. It's not something we're normally going to do. So how often do you think we catch stage 1 iron deficiency? Almost never. We usually start to find it when we hit into the stage 2. Okay. Our serum iron will go down because we don't have as much. Our TIBC will go up because since we don't have as much, we have room for more, right? And our storage is going to be going down progressively as we go along. So basically, as you see, as this progresses, we wipe out the storage compartment in stage 1. We really start chunking through the transport compartment in stage 2. Then we start getting down here into stage 3, and the picture doesn't go any further, but this will keep going down. And we will actually start eating into our functional iron compartment. We're going to start rationing it. Okay, each red cell only gets this much. So by the time we're in full iron deficiency, stage 3, we have a decreased hemoglobin, we have a decreased iron, an increased TIBC, and a decreased ferritin. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I had a doctor who said that all Americans are borderline
Well, good for him. I would want research to back that up.
Okay.
And to the positive side, not that I don't necessarily believe him, he may know something I don't know, but to be positive, our diet sucks as a nation. Whether it is through the fact that we like McDonald's more than we like salads, or whether it is through a lack of availability or whatever. Kids want chips and salsa, they don't want, red beans and rice. So it may be, and it is nutritional. The number one cause of iron deficiency anemia is nutritional. So that may be where he's coming from. I need to see some studies to back it up. We all have our medical opinions, so we go for that. Clinical findings in iron deficiency anemia, and one of the things you need to remember about this, let me see if I added this. We have our typical anemia symptoms. Which ones are, what the heck are typical anemia symptoms? What are our symptoms of anemia? Fatigue, weakness, pallor, being cold all the time. A lot of times, yeah, because your body is, anytime your body starts to have hemoglobin problems, it's going to draw all the blood it can into the central spaces because it wants all the organs in here functioning. That's more important than the fingers. So it's going to draw the blood to the core. So unfortunately, that means your fingers and your toes are going to get cold. The other things that we see in iron deficiency, spoon-shaped nails. Have you ever seen anyone whose nails, instead of going like this, go like this? They're concave instead of convex. It isn't always caused by iron deficiency anemia, but in patients with iron deficiency anemia, we frequently see this as it gets further and further along. Hair gets brittle and breaking because a lot of metabolism is not going on correctly. The most unique finding for this, and pica is not, if you have pica, you don't have iron deficiency, but it's not uncommon for patients with iron deficiency anemia to have pica, which means an unusual food craving. The one that I know of, we had one lady at the hospital where I trained who ate dryer lint. She was compelled to eat dryer lint to the point she would go to the laundromat. Yeah. But the problem is the body's going, okay, I need something. Haven't you ever had, okay, you've all had them. I know you have. That day when I want something. Do I want sweet? That's not what I want. Ooh, salty, yeah. No, that's not what I want. And you go through the kitchen and you take a piece of everything and you can't find what you want. Well, basically, you ain't giving the body what it wants. And so it says, well, I don't know, maybe dirt will do it. Okay? Don't ask, it just happens. This is not the My Strange Addiction with the people eating chocolate stuff. That's more of a mental issue. This is a physical craving for weird things.
Isn't paper?
Paper's one of them, yeah. Paper's one of them. Powder is usually not associated with iron deficiency anemia, but yes. But it is. Again, it's just an unnatural craving. You're looking, your body's going, come on, give me something here, guys. There's got to be something that's going to give me some iron. Laboratory findings. Microcytic, this is a microcytic hypochromic, which means what are my cells going to look like? Small and very large area of central pallor. I have some pictures where if you look at the red cells, they're more like a ring. And that's what I said. That's when you start getting really low, it starts rationing out the iron. We'll put a little bit in each cell, and maybe they'll get around enough that they can kind of keep you from dead. Decreased RBC hemoglobin and hematocrit. I keep track. The 5 lowest hemoglobins I have ever seen in a living, breathing person. And to make this even worse, these were all living, breathing, walking people, what's a normal female hemoglobin? We had a woman, and this is the top, it's not top, number 5, 2.9. Number 4, 2.4. Number 3, 2.0. 2, 1.9. And the record holder, 1.4. This woman walked in because she was feeling a
She was zombie.
little tired.
So how do you, does the sysmics go that low?
Yes, actually it does. We had to look it up.
I was gonna say, because I know we had a patient with 3.0 and it rejected.
It depends on the sysmics, but yeah, it does. And what do you do if it doesn't?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have a choice. The worst one I ever saw was a baby with 2.0, but that was a newborn, but that was because the baby bled out during delivery. You know, everybody keeps little things on their walls to remind you of why you do. Do any of you do that? You keep stuff that reminds you why you do what you do. I had a letter from the neonatologist at SLU that said thanks to the rapid response of the blood bank, the baby lived. So it's one of those things, it's like when you wonder, why am I doing this? That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm doing this. The 1.4 hemoglobin lady, the thing with these people who walked in, they get there slowly. So you're perfectly normal, you're walking along, walking around doing all your stuff, and your hemoglobin's going down, and maybe you don't have quite the bounce in your stuff, but you're still making do. If you go slowly, just like food, okay? If you're used to eating 3,000 calories a day, okay? And you go down to 2,000, you're gonna be a little bit hungry, right? But you're still fine. As you slowly inch your way down, your body compensates, doesn't it? The same thing with this oxygen. As you slowly creep down to this level, your body adjusts to that lack of oxygen, and you just learn to work better. The 2.0 was Mrs. Tippett. I don't think Mrs. Tippett weighed 50 pounds soaking wet. She was like, just figure out. No, she was an elderly lady. Her husband had died, and it just wasn't worth it to cook anymore. The only reason I met Mrs. Tippett is because she walked 3/4 of a mile to the hospital because she was feeling poorly. She came in with a 2-gram hemoglobin, and they transfused her to a 6. They had to suck a unit off because her heart couldn't pump it. For her, 6 was too much. When she got all done and got released from the hospital, she didn't have anyone to take her home, so my mother called me to pick her up. The only thing the woman told me on the way home, I'm just glad I live at the top of the hill. 2 people. And she had a constant slow bleed. She had diverticulitis. And so she would go in every now and then, and they'd give her a unit, and she'd feel better. And she'd go home for a couple more weeks, and she'd go in to see her doctor every few weeks, and they'd monitor her hemoglobin, but they never took her above a 5. I'm just feeling so spry. I said, I will never forget, I'm just glad I live at the top of the hill. But these people can get down it's like we see it, you'd see a 4. When you guys see your first 4 or 5 gram hemoglobin, oh my God. Then you're gonna see your first 2 and you're gonna go, what? Okay. I've seen hemoglobins of 1, 2, and 3, but in like gunshot wounds in patients who, if you or I had a 1 or 2 gram hemoglobin, we will be passed out on the floor because our body hasn't compensated. Okay. So sudden loss of that much blood is a whole different story than this slowly progressive iron deficiency. Your body can adjust over time to the slow decrease of the amount of oxygen. Now, are you going to be doing any really exercise? No, probably not. You're not going to have the energy for anything. We will see generally an increased RDW just because we're going to see a mix of microcytes and not so microcytes. We're going to see a little bit of poikilocytosis. We generally, when we're looking at iron deficiency, are looking at an MCV less than 70. Okay, somewhere in the 60s is usually where we see the MCVs on these guys. Bone marrow findings, and again, really we don't do bone marrows for anemia as much as we used to. Pretty much bone marrow, if you were to do one, you'd see you aren't making red cells, erythroid red cell hyperplasia. You're making them, but they're not having anything in them. Okay. I don't remember what that K word means. The K word means cytoplasm lags behind. In other words, what you're going to see, your nucleus is going to mature normally, but your cytoplasm isn't going to change colors like it normally does. Iron is going to be absent or decreased using the compression blue stain. Do you think I'm ever going to ask you anything about the bone marrow findings? I am going to ask you about the IBC and the TABC. Okay, we're back on our iron studies. Our serum iron is going to be decreased. Normal is about 50 to 160, and Barb may give you different levels, whatever she tells you. Again, these are just like basic ballpark ranges. Ferritin should be over 400, or it should be up to 400. You should have some, so basically 15 nanograms, and a nanogram is what, 10 to the negative 9th. Okay, so 9 decimal places. And that's very little. Yeah.
These three values we need to memorize.
You do not need to know them from me. I'm just giving them to you as, if I put these values on the test, I will put the normal ranges with them. Okay. You do not need to memorize these normal ranges at this time. Yes?
Is the serum iron the one that's headed to storage?
Yes, that's the iron-bound transferrin. Okay, that's the transport iron. The ferritin is the stored iron. Transferrin is the protein that carries the iron. So when it gets hooked to the iron, we measure it as serum iron, right? But if it doesn't have any iron to carry, just the plain transferrin is going to be hanging around. So this value is going to increase, and that's not on our chart. But our transferrin is going to increase because there's more of it available because it's not hooked up to our serum iron. Our total iron binding capacity, how much we can take in, is definitively going to increase. The percent saturation is how much iron we have divided by how much we can keep, make it a percentage, and it's going to be decreased. So in other words, normally we have between 20 and 55% saturation of our transferrin. We're not going to have that much. Prussian blue iron stain, if you would do one, you wouldn't see any. Again, not something we do very often. If we do it, it's on bone marrow. How do we treat it? Well, how about we give you some iron? Okay. And then we're going to treat what caused it, because iron deficiency anemia is not usually a primary disease. It is secondary to something else. Poor diet, chronic blood loss, parasitic infection, whatever's causing you to need more iron or lose your iron, you want to fix that. If somebody's got a GI bleed, give them something to fix it if you can, or surgically fix it if you can. If not, compensate. Okay, so if you've got a permanent GI bleed, or in the case of the lady with the 1.4 hemoglobin, she had severe fibroids, and they figured out that she lost almost a half a liter of blood a month through menstruation. That's like a cup and a half of blood every month. Well, that's what happened. So they were able to remove the fibroids, and she was fine. But if you can't, like with a GI bleed, like Mrs. Tippett, what you're going to do instead is you're going to try and balance that. Okay, this person is pregnant, needs more. So what's one of the main ingredients in prenatal vitamins? Iron. Okay. This person needs more blood, give them more iron. This person's slowly losing blood, Let's give them enough iron to compensate. A couple of things we're not gonna do is yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
Parasitic infections aren't like common in this country.
No, they are not, which is why I touch on them and say they're there.
Okay.
Because if you were to go elsewhere, or with the immigrant population, or people coming from, especially Central America, Mexico, not so much, but Central America and things like that especially, we can see. And those are basically what it is you will see not only iron deficiency, but malabsorption in everything. But you're right, we don't see it.
I was trying to think of something, you know?
Yeah.
That was.
Pretty much is gonna be somebody who traveled in. Which is why when I talk about history, it's important to know where did you go. So we do want to try and correct the underlying, correct what's happening. What we're not going to do is give you IV iron. Because one thing that you need to remember very well, because we're going to talk about it a bunch more when we get to hemolytic anemias, if the hemoglobin is not contained within your red cell, it is not only non-functional, it is toxic. It will shut your liver down. It will shut your kidneys down. It will shut your heart down. It will shut your lungs down. It will shut you down. Okay? So free-ranging iron is a bad thing. It starts binding to things it should not bind to. So we do not give, in fact, as we'll talk about iron overload in a minute, we do not. So how are we going to replace iron? Okay, the doctor says, I'm not giving you iron pills. I'll tell you one thing, sorry for being indelicate, but they constipate the devil out of you. They can be very hard on your stomach. They make you feel very nauseous. A lot of people cannot tolerate iron pills. So how else can I get iron into you? Or how are you going to get it into your kiddos? Because you're not going to want to give them an iron pill. That's overwhelming their portable systems. So how are we going to get iron into our bodies? Food. And let's be more specific. What types of food?
Fish, eggs.
Not fish.
It's not fish.
Red meats.
Red meats?
Red meat.
Red meat?
And nuts.
Yep. You know, somebody who comes in with an extremely low iron, you give them a nice bloody steak, boys. That red meat has a lot of it. But what if I've got a vegan?
Beans,
Dark red beans, dark leafy vegetables, spinach. Although the iron in spinach is not as bioavailable, it's harder for you to absorb than some of the others. But yeah, dark red beans. Mm-hmm.
Because they gave me a list.
Mhm.
Because I was,
Do you still have it?
no.
Okay.
But they gave me a list. It was fish and everything. It had so many, the same things you were saying. But I know fish was on there.
Certain
'Cause
fish
I ate
do.
it. Yeah, I think
certain
it was
fish
like
may.
a certain fish. Yeah.
Yeah, not all of them will, but certain ones may. I'll need to look into that a little
Because
bit.
I had to eat it, and I had to believe it because I was under.
That's very common.
They
I
had
can
me
get
take.
it. I can get it.
If you've got one, I'd love it, yeah, just to see what the current list is. I have one, but it's,
Because they had me taking pregnancy pills. My mother was like, "Is she pregnant?" I'm like,
prenatal vitamins are so super cheap
Yeah.
that, yeah, when I had some problems, I noticed my hemoglobin was going down because I had to regrade everybody's practicals because I thought they all got it wrong. I use me as a control. I've been a 13-gram hemoglobin and 39 crit for years. That wasn't anymore. So first thing I did, I went and got prenatal vitamins because they $8 for like a bunch of them. And then took care of all the other underlying problems. But yeah, so, and prenatal vitamins are cheap. They're really cheap.
How do you
But you can overdose, so you don't want to take too many.
right? How many can you take a day?
I
Just
do not
one?
know. I think it's just one, but it would depend on the vitamin itself. Look at the package insert and ask your doctor. Okay.
I have a resident that takes ferrous sulfate in liquid form. Is it going to be still considered low?
That's iron. That's just flat out iron. It's just liquefied.
But with the added sulfur, is that going to be
That's
stabilizing it? So it
you
doesn't-
can't just put iron. You have to put it. It has to be an iron salt so your body can absorb it. And so they just hook it onto a sulfate, which doesn't hold it very tight. It likes iron, but it can do without it. And if you put it in something that really likes it, it's going to go through the body and you're not going to get anything. A couple other things you can do. Cook in a cast iron pan. Just simply get yourself a cast iron skillet, and the food that you cook, especially if it's acidic, will eke out some of that iron. Honestly, it's kind of odd because people in the Middle Ages, while they had anemia and all kinds of other diseases, iron deficiency wasn't usually a problem because they cooked in iron pots and they used all kinds of iron things. Another thing you can do is store your foods in red clay pots. It's got to be red clay. It can't be others, but pure red clay pots. Those red clay deposits are loaded with iron. And I can remember as a child, and I thought I was insane till I finally got a girl in here from Georgia, and she's, oh yeah, we do that all the time. At certain times of the year, you take the red clay. Red clay is sweet, by the way. It actually tastes good. Oh, I want a red clay. But they would actually take the red clay, and they would kind of dissolve it in water and then filter it through to pull out, nasty stuff that was in it. And then you would just mix it with a little water like Play-Doh, and you would roll it out into a real thin little pancake, and they would eat it. I was like, and that actually partially was an old slave trick because they didn't get good nutrition, and obviously from somewhere somebody picked it up. Native Americans, again, not as big a problem because they stored everything in red clay, well, at least tribes that use red clay. That iron will leach into your food. And how much do you need? Not very much. So very seriously, cooking in a cast iron skillet, if you're anemic, it's enough to give you a little bit. It does increase your intake, yes.
That's not considered a pancake?
What?
Eating the red clay, that's not considered a pancake?
No, not really. I guess maybe it is. Maybe it started that way, but I don't know who first thought of it. Well, I'll tell you who thought of it. Some little 2-year-old, because it's kind of sweet. It is sweet. I'm sorry, it just is. You get it on your hands, then you get it in your mouth, and you're like, "Ooh, wait, that's not bad." I don't eat it anymore. I grew up. Every once in a while, I still do. Other things, again, dark leafy vegetables. We mentioned red beans, dark red kidney beans. Most of the stuff that's high in iron is going to be red or dark black or dark red or dark green, but it usually tends to be nice and dark in color. There are lists online, thousands and thousands of them. And what happens if I take too much?
Excrete it.
Huh?
I was saying just poop it out, excrete it.
You're just going to flush it literally. In fact, that's the way it is with most vitamins. If you take too much, you're just going to flush it. I had a doctor when I was in training. He told me we could probably properly give proper nutrition to the entire world if we just strained our pee, because we flood Americans as a whole flush thousands of dollars worth of vitamins down the drain every day. Just because you take it, you don't need it, you pee it out. We're going to track the CBC to see if your hemoglobin goes back up. But the first thing we're going to look at is the retic count. Okay? And what's a retic? An immature red blood cell, a baby. I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. They're produced in the bone marrow. It's going to take a couple of days because remember it takes 3 to 5 days to go from a blast to a red cell. We're going to see about 5 to 10 days after we start treatment, we're going to see an increase in retics. Why? Because your body is suddenly going to have iron and your bone marrow is going to go, oh, look what I can make. And it's going to make all these new cells. Your retics should rise until your hemoglobin levels are back to normal. And then what should they do? Fall back to normal. Now, if you've got someone who's got a continual bleed or something like that, you can monitor that with the retic as well. If your body's having to continually produce more red cells because you're losing them, if I watch the retic, if my retic doesn't go back down, that means I still have an issue going on. Okay? Your retic should stay down below about 2%. But if your retic doesn't go back up, what does that tell me?
It's not an iron problem.
Say it.
It's not an iron problem.
It's either not an iron problem, that's probably the best guess, or what's the other thing you could tell me? Maybe my bone marrow's not working. Would it be possible to have iron deficiency, anemia, and bone marrow failure at the same time?
Sure.
Oh yeah, makes life more fun.
What does a retake look like on a regular stain?
That is our polychromatophilic red cell. It's going to be a little bit blue, and the day it comes out, it's blue, and within a day or two, it will be back down to the regular red color. So it's only blue for just a little short time. Okay, that's iron deficiency anemia. That's the first big anemia. Jean thinks the anemias are harder. I think the anemias are easier. It just kind of depends on the person. So I always start with whites because I want to move into diffs more quickly. She always started with reds because I think she wanted to get through the red cells more thoroughly. Does it matter? This that we're going to talk about now is a second form of iron-associated problem. It's an anemia of chronic disease. This means that you've got something else going on, and it leads to anemia. Most of these are going to be associated with inflammatory states, especially things like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. There's tons and tons of inflammatory type diseases. And what test is going to be elevated in all of our inflammatory diseases? The SID rate. I gotta stop dissing it. The poor thing's going to be complex. It would tell us if our SID rate's elevated. It's going to tell us we have some sort of inflammatory going on. What happens is that in this, you have iron, but you can't use it. Because what happens is because of the inflammatory response, we see an increase in our neutrophils and our macrophages. The increased lactoferrin, which is in our neutrophils, binds to iron. So instead of getting picked up by the transport iron and taken to where we need to store it, it gets stored in the neutrophils instead. That means that the iron isn't available to red cells because the red cells have a transferrin receptor. So the transferrin's floating around, hooks onto the precursor, the red cell precursor, hooks onto the surface, drops its iron into the red cell, and then takes off to go pick up more iron. The lactoferrin does not hook to the red cell. The acute phase reactive proteins, and you'll learn more about these, I believe, in chemistry, but all these are is anytime you have an inflammatory response, these are proteins that are going to increase. CRP is C-reactive protein. I don't care if you remember that. Fibrinogen is actually a inflammatory acute phase reactive protein. And ferritin. So what's going to happen if I've got increased ferritin? It's going to honk onto that iron and it isn't going to let it go real easy. So what happens is I got iron, I got plenty of it. If I measure your stored iron, you're going to have lots. The problem is, it's all tied up. It's that cabinet of goodies that you always Grandma always saved for when she had good company. Always had that special stuff put up in the cabinet for when she invited somebody over. Okay? Nobody ever got to use it. So it just sits there. So you've got it, but you can't use it. Yes?
Could you flood your system with iron at that point?
No, because it just gets sucked up too. You take more iron, and it's going to get stored. And it isn't a matter of how much iron you have. And you're also not going to increase your intake because you are intaking just fine. But the problem is once it gets into the body, it doesn't let it go. Cytokines from macrophages also interfere with the erythropoiesis. Okay, our increased macrophages due to our inflammatory response are going to suppress erythropoiesis. We can give EPO therapy, but you gotta give them a lot. And this stuff is expensive. So this is not something we do very often, but if you simply have someone with a severe, especially with lupus or some long-term inflammatory state, it sometimes is necessary to be able just to keep them alive. One of the diagnosis, this tends to be very mild. You'll see the hemoglobin in the 10 to 11 range. So you're not really like super anemic. You just always just a little on the low end, maybe down even into a 9. We'll rarely see this progress down to a microhypo, and that's usually if you get other things going on. But for the most part, it looks normal on a red blood cell, on a red peripheral blood smear. Your hemoglobins aren't going to be notoriously low. Okay, the ferritin saturated with iron, it's just not available. Treatment, anemia is generally mild. We're going to treat the underlying cause. You can treat it with EPO, but that's pretty much a last-ditch effort. One thing I guess I need to mention that you think, what's the first thing you think of when you're lacking blood? What should we give you? We should give you a transfusion, right? We should give you. It used to be that way. Now, if you have to give transfusion, it's actually looked upon as failure to manage your patient. Transfusion is considered the last option that you should have, that you should be able to manage your patient otherwise, and having to transfuse them means that you are failing to treat your patient properly.
Is that because of the dangers associated with the transfusion?
What's that?
Is that because of the dangers associated with the transfusion?
Dangers associated with transfusion, proper monitoring of the blood supply to try not to overuse the blood supply. And truthfully, the body recorrecting itself is much healthier and better for you than transfusing in somebody else's blood. Now, for acute blood loss, obviously, you come in gushing blood from 15 stab wounds last weekend, and yes, you're going to pour some blood into that body, okay? But the lady who came in with a 1.4, love her to death. I pray she does well. Pray she never comes back because I don't want to see her ever again. She had an antibody and had a transfusion reaction. Talk about fun! It was all exciting. Wait till you talk to Barb. She'll tell you about transfusion reactions. So we gave her a unit of blood and her body blew it up. Literally. We had to give her another unit after we identified the antibody, which showed up, and it was a mess. And she was upstairs. I'm worried. She said, oh my God, 1.4 hemoglobin. Oh my God, oh my God. I called the nurse to tell her. I said, she's got an antibody. We found it on repeat. It's going to take me time. I've got it. Oh, she's doing fine. She's sitting here eating crackers and chatting. Okay. Well, I guess I don't need to be panicked. She's doing okay. But one thing is that transfusion has been considered, has kind of turned the corner. Instead of being your first thought, it really is supposed to be the last thought. Now, is it a no thought? No, you don't want to totally ignore it. We use it when it's necessary. But they're getting a lot more strict on the rules. Yes?
Was she only able to handle that level of hemoglobin because it was a slow progression?
Because it was very, very slow. It probably took her years to get that low.
But any normal person with, let's say, a stab wound, their body would be able to
1.4, they won't
fast
recover.
Right.
Yeah, if you get a 1.4 hemoglobin on an acute, I won't say won't because there are always miracles and there are always somebody who's just too damn stubborn to die or whatever. But I'll tell you, you get out there, you'll see it. It's like, why isn't that person dead? I don't know. My aunt, I love my aunt dearly. They called us 5. I kid you not, 5 different times to tell us she was dead. When they called us the 3rd time, they thought we were worried because we said, "Are you sure?" They called us twice before. We got over there. She's sitting there eating ice cream. She does not look dead to me. Her heart rate would go down to 9. 9. We're like, did you listen? Did 2 nurses with a stethoscope listen directly to her heart for a full 5 minutes? Oh, of course, of course. Yep, sure did. The 5th time, the doctor called. Yeah, she really has progressed. But and she was just too stubborn about it. Okay.
I'm gonna keep giving her ice cream every time she comes back. I do it too.
Well, she shouldn't be having ice cream with it. The woman is 94 years old. She's been dead 3 times. Let her have her ice cream. You know, I'm sorry. There just comes a point when, you know, well, we've got to keep her healthy. She's 94 years old. She would rather be unhealthy and dead than, you know, living without her ice cream. She had a cup of ice cream every day. She lived on a dairy farm when she was little, and her mom used to make her ice cream once a month. And then as she got older, well, she could buy ice cream and so you could have it every day. She liked her ice creams. All right, sideroblastic anemia or lead poisoning. PB is lead. The causes of lead poisoning, there are actually some hereditary disease states called the true sideroblastic anemias. Okay, and if you remember, we talked about the myelodysplastic syndrome with sideroblasts, with ring sideroblasts. Okay, that would be a sideroblastic anemia. They can be acquired very commonly, are TB drugs such as rifampin. They do something that interferes with lead or with They do something that interferes with iron metabolism. Chloramphenicol, severe alcohol poisoning. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of alcohol. Certain chemo drugs, and then lead leads to plumbism, which is lead poisoning. Okay. So the reason lead poisoning is so harmful to small children, which is why we have to be very careful about lead-based paints and that kind of thing, is it starves the body, including the brain, of oxygen. And in children under 5, that's when they're making almost all their neural pathways. That's when their brain is starting to develop. So if they have lead poisoning, and it interferes in other ways too, the lead gets into other places it shouldn't. But part of it is a severe lack of oxygen to the brain and to the rest of the body, so the child does not develop normally. Basically, this interferes with heme synthesis. For some reason, the first step is succinyl-CoA and glycine to aminolevulinic acid. The next step is aminolevulinic acid to porphobilinogen. Okay. This lead interferes with the change of ALA to porphobilinogen. It interferes with that process. So unfortunately, what happens is you don't make the ring. And if you don't make the ring, where are you going to put the iron? It's just going to sit there. It's not going to have any place to go. It's not going to have a house. So it's just going to hang out around the nucleus, waiting for you to bring a house to it. So it's going to give you a little ring, sideroblast. This interferes, not having the ring, interferes with the attachment of iron to the porphyrin ring. So we see both an increase in iron and we see an increase in our protoporphyrins. Protoporphyrins are anything that are precursors, protoporphyrin, coproporphyrin, uroporphyrin, and whatever that other one is that I can never remember. Okay. The iron deposits build up in the mitochondria, and we get that. When we look on the peripheral blood, a lot of times what we'll see is we'll see basophilic stippling, which is basically lead. Now, Pappenheimer bodies, that's where they're kind of concentrated all together. In lead poisoning and some of these other sideroblastic anemias, it's going to be more diffuse. So these are just like little specks of lead all over the cell. Yes.
Is lead poisoning like a slow process? Like once it's begun, it takes a while to get it out of your system or to stop it?
It depends on the amount you get in. It really is. If your kid happened to be playing in the old barn and he found a piece of lead paint and ate one piece of lead paint, he's probably going to be just fine. The problem is, like, little kids gnaw on everything, you know that. So like if your windowsill has a lead-based paint on there, they're going to gnaw at that and over time are going to increase. Your body has you shouldn't have lead in your body,
Right.
so there is no elimination mechanism. So once the lead gets in there, it can't get out. So you're going to have a buildup of that lead. And so it really is going to depend on the severity of the problems.
Unless you seek treatment.
And we'll talk about that in just a second.
Yes, I think I might be asking. There's a way to flush.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a second. Because for all of these diseases, you have to know how you get them, how you diagnose them, and how you treat them. So the treatment, the hereditary is very difficult to treat. You can make a synthetic heme precursor, so sometimes if it depends on which step of heme synthesis it's dealing with, usually the ALA to the porphobilinogen. So if you give them porphobilinogen precursors, then you bypass that step that's being shorted, and it can go ahead and continue to make the protoporphyrin ring. Some respond, not all do, and it's very expensive, and that would be pretty much a lifelong thing. So it's going to be very expensive to treat, and like I said, not everybody responds to the synthetic precursors. Stop the drug. Duh. If I'm giving you a drug that makes you sick, stop it. Unless it's more important that you have the drug, then you have a problem. We're going to chelate lead with EDTA. All right, EDTA, yeah, same stuff that's in your purple top tubes in your ice cream. Okay. EDTA is a chelating agent, and that just means chelate, it just grabs onto it. Basically, they'll give you EDTA in, I don't know if it's orally or intravenously, I would assume IV. I will look it up sometime. But basically, they give you EDTA, and just like when we put it in a tube with blood, it will bind the calcium. It likes lead better than it likes calcium. So it will go through your body, and any excess lead that's in there, it's going to glom onto that. And when it chelates it, that means it's going to irreversibly bind it. It will not let go, which is why no matter how long you let the EDTA sit, if it wasn't clotted to start with, it won't clot. So when the nurses tell you, don't let it sit there and clot, just smile and nod. I'll be careful. Right before I put it in the hemolyzer.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could it not be filtered out through like dialysis or not?
No, usually the risk of dialysis is higher than the benefit you get from doing that. But again, it depends on the severity. I guess if it got high enough, you'd give them the chelating agent and then dialyze to remove the chelation.
Mm.
That's one of the balances in medicine. You know, I can cure you, but it'll kill you. What? I tell you what, that leg looks pretty bad. I can take care of that so it doesn't bother you anymore. You just whack it right off and they bleed to death. Well, the leg doesn't bother them anymore. Okay, but you have to make sure that the treatment is not more harm than good. Last one we're going to talk about is iron overload. Okay, I told you that iron that is not bound up in hemoglobin inside the red cell is bad. Okay? It's toxic, does all kinds of nasty things. Hemochromatosis just means high color in the blood or excess iron. The first form is hereditary. It is a homozyte. In homozygous, you have the disease. In heterozygous, you have the trait, and that's fairly common in a lot of these. This is one we actually find mostly in European Caucasians, especially Balkan states and more northern Europe. Occasionally, and again, overexuberant or inappropriate iron therapy. Now, giving iron IVs is just not a good idea. Okay, but we have some doctors. The iron saturates the stores. Okay? You can only store so much. You have a TIBC, a total iron binding capacity. Once you exceed that capacity, if you still have iron, you have problems because you don't have anywhere to put it. Okay? So what happens is it starts to accumulate in places it should not be, especially the liver, the skin. And actually, it gives the skin a gold color. I don't just mean a deep yellow, I mean like metallic shiny gold. You get people who turn gold. This is bad. This is very deadly. I believe the mechanism on the hereditary force is the same kind of thing that has to do with pernicious anemia, which we'll talk more about. And it's more of a stomach kind of thing, so you're absorbing more than you're supposed to. We really do not have a method of getting rid of iron, just like lead. We don't have a natural, our body's like, hey, get rid of iron, are you nuts? I need that. I just won't take any more if I don't need it, but I'm not gonna get rid of it. Okay, I can recycle it endlessly. I have a wonderful recycling plant. I don't need a whole lot more, I lose a little bit, but I can recycle, and I'm about 90% efficient, 95% efficient at recycling it. Why would I get rid of it? So I don't have a natural mechanism to get rid of this stuff. So if I'm absorbing more than I can handle, then it's gonna start to build up, and it's going to start to be toxic to things that it shouldn't be toxic to. Treatment for the hereditary, it does get worse as your age increases. For one thing, the buildup is slow, so maybe at first it's really minor and you don't absorb too much more, and then as you get older, it still builds up. Truthfully, therapeutic phlebotomy is the treatment of choice. Okay, the one time it's nice to be female. Most females who have hereditary hemochromatosis do not show any symptoms until after menopause. You don't need to lose much, just a little bit. If you cannot do therapeutic phlebotomy, you can use a chelating agent, although it is not preferable. It's not as pleasant. If it's acquired, stop giving them iron. Sometimes just a little common sense will take care of a lot of this. We do have, and what they will do with the therapeutic phlebotomy here, this isn't like our polycythemia. We're not taking off the excess red cells to basically keep your blood levels down. They will keep patients with hereditary hemochromatosis, they will keep them at about a 10 or 11 gram hemoglobin on purpose. Just slightly low so that it doesn't affect their quality of life. But if you take off enough to keep them just a little bit anemic, then the body's going to need increased iron stores, right? To make more hemoglobin. So if you just keep them mildly anemic all the time, the iron doesn't build up. And the slight anemia is significantly healthier than the iron excess. Does that make sense? Most of the orders on these patients coming in for hemochromatosis read, if hemoglobin greater than 10, take a unit. If hemoglobin, between 11 and, if hemoglobin greater than 12, take a unit and a half, or take however many cc's. Yes.
So are they sitting there waiting for their test to be run to figure out the hemoglobin is?
Yeah, they'll usually come in for a CBC, and then when they find out what the hemoglobin is, then they will schedule a therapeutic phlebotomy later.
So it doesn't have to be.
No, it's not an immediate kind of thing. They just want to keep them a little low, because if you have excess iron, it's going to be picked up by the body and made into hemoglobin. So as your hemoglobin levels near normal, you're going to start pouring it into the storage iron again. And the point is, we want to keep it so that you're putting any incoming iron into the functional iron category, not into the storage iron category. Because once you fill the storage iron, it starts going places it should not go. So what you're going to do is keep it so that it is in the circulating or in the functional iron compartment. And that's all you're doing with it. Totally overwhelmed? Confused? Or does that make more sense than the leukemias?
So much better, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that?
So much better.
It's really cool stuff.
Alright, everybody dead yet? I have found it's actually easier to just keep those last couple slides. Everyone's like, oh no, not one. But it's so much easier than to get in here tomorrow, pull it up, and go through that. And we can. So, we will talk about bone marrow failure tomorrow. So if you want to print that one out this afternoon, or this morning. This afternoon. I've lost track of days, I've lost track of time. Pretty much all blur. Right. If anyone still owes me things from their packet, please try to find those and get those into me as soon as possible. I have everything graded that I have except for yesterday's tests. I'm about halfway through those. The practicals I haven't graded yet, but most of them look pretty good. I've only found one, I think, that the value was off, and I believe I already talked to that person. And we discovered the the cause of it, so I'm going to deal with that, and I've already talked to him how to do it, so. But I haven't found anybody who was significantly off. I haven't gotten through all of them, but I am working on them, so. I'll have the test for you by the end of today, and I'll have you. We have to talk about calculations for the retic. Do you want to do it in here, or do you want to do it in lab? In lab. I'm fine with that, but you are going to have to pay attention because these calculations are going to be on the test. Okay? The calculations are in that miscellaneous hematology test PowerPoint that I have, that I told you that I put up just because that way you don't have to take notes in lab. So these calculations are in there, but we're going to do a couple of them. We're also going to set up a retic, so take 10-15 minutes, take a little break. We're going to set up a retic, which means I know you're all excited. We're going to make some slides, and said rates need to be set up either today or tomorrow.